Two deputies stopped an elderly black couple and laughed while going through their car. What they didn't realize was the man had spent his life building courtrooms, and he was ready to bring them as to one. Clarence Dupree kept his hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. The left turn signal was still flashing, even though they'd been pulled over for nearly a minute. "Why'd they pull us over?" Evelyn asked, her voice steady but quiet. "Said it was a broken taillight," Clarence replied, checking the side mirror. "But our lights are fine." She gave a small nod. "That's what I figured." The blue lights behind them continued to flash, lighting up the tall pines along the rural highway. They were on Highway 84 just outside Valdosta, Georgia, a road they'd driven dozens of times after visiting their grandkids in Jackson. Usually quiet, a simple 2-lane stretch, until now. Two deputies approached the car, one on each side. Clarence rolled down his window halfway. The officer on his side was tall, white, late 30s, with a buzz cut and mirrored shades. "License and registration," he said in a flat voice. "Step out of the vehicle, sir." Clarence blinked. "May I ask why I'm being told to step out?" The deputy clenched his jaw like he was chewing something. "You got an issue following orders?" "I'd just like to understand why," Clarence answered calmly. "You mentioned a taillight." The other deputy, shorter and more stout, came to Evelyn's side. "Ma'am, keep your hands where I can see them." Evelyn didn't move. "They've been in plain sight the whole time, officer." Things escalated quickly. Clarence soon found himself outside, hands placed on the hood as he was frisked. The taller deputy, his name tag read Riggins, seemed thrown off by how calm Clarence remained. No shouting, no panic, just measured questions. "What brings you through here?" Riggins asked. "Just returning from a family visit," Clarence said. "Where to?" "Jackson, Mississippi." Riggins smirked. "Long trip? You carrying anything illegal?" Clarence turned his head just slightly. "I'm a retired attorney, sir. I know my rights. And unless you have probable cause, you have no grounds to search my vehicle." That got under Riggins' skin. "Probable cause? You think you're smarter than me?" Clarence met his gaze. "I didn't say that. I said I know what the law requires." Riggins let out a bitter laugh and muttered under his breath. Clarence didn't catch everything, but heard smart-ass old man and should have stayed home. Evelyn was asked to get out as well. She did so gracefully, dignified, and composed. Still, the deputies searched the car, rummaging through bags and opening the trunk. They found nothing. 10 minutes passed before Riggins came back with a citation in hand. "Broken taillight," he said. Clarence accepted it. "We'll get it checked." As the deputies walked back to their cruiser, they chuckled to themselves. Clarence glanced down at the ticket. He already knew he'd challenge it. Back inside the car, Evelyn stayed silent for a few miles. "They thought we'd be scared," she finally said. Clarence nodded. "They don't know who we are." She looked over. "Did you get their badge numbers?" He patted his jacket. "Every word, every detail." She smiled faintly. "Good. Let's make sure they don't forget." Clarence turned onto Route 133 without speaking. His grip on the wheel tightened, not out of fear, but determination. The deputies had no idea they just handed a citation to the wrong man, and by the time they realized it, the court date would already be on the calendar. Back at the Lowndes County Station, Deputy Carl Riggins leaned back with his boots on the desk, biting into a gas station burrito like he hadn't just intimidated an elderly couple. They just stood there. Didn't even raise their voice, he said to Officer Tyler Nash, who was scrolling through his phone. Nash snorted. The guy kept talking law like he was some kind of Ivy League lawyer. "Man's driving a beat-up Buick. Don't hit me with that civil rights nonsense." "Yeah," Riggins said through a mouthful. He looked like one of those types. Sharp tongue, quiet wife. Probably used to getting his way. Thought a ticket would shut him up. Neither man realized Clarence had recorded the whole thing, not on a phone. He hadn't taken one out. But in his signature brown leather notebook, tucked neatly inside his jacket, handwritten, time-stamped, precise. It was the same method Clarence had used his whole career, taking down men far more dangerous than these two. Back home in Tallahassee, Clarence sat in his study, flipping through that notebook while Evelyn stood by the window with her arms crossed. He said, "You think you're smarter than me?" she repeated, still shaken. Clarence didn't look up. He said it twice. First when I questioned the search. She nodded slowly. And Nash said you looked nervous, like that gave him the right. Clarence marked a page and shut the notebook. Which it doesn't. He picked up the landline and dialed a number from memory. After 3 rings, a woman's voice answered. "Rosalind, it's Clarence Dupree." There was a brief pause. "Well, Abby," she said warmly. "Haven't heard your voice in years. Everything okay?" Clarence exhaled through his nose. "Not exactly. Evelyn and I were stopped on Highway 84. 2 deputies. Unjustified search. Aggressive stop. We need to talk. Tell me, did you get names?" "Riggins and Nash." There was a pause on the other end. "I've heard those names before," the voice said. Clarence looked over at Evelyn, who raised a questioning eyebrow. "What have you heard?" she asked. "State-level internal affairs flagged them last year, but the sheriff's office buried the investigation." "I'll see what I can uncover." "Thank you," Clarence replied. "We'll need it." He hung up the phone and leaned back in his chair. Evelyn rested a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You sure you want to go back into that fight?" she asked softly. Clarence's voice was quiet but firm. "Not for me. For all the people they've done this to, who didn't have the knowledge or resources to fight back." Evelyn didn't challenge him. Instead, she walked over to a cabinet she hadn't touched in years. She pulled out a slim leather case, opened it, and removed an old judge's nameplate. She placed it on the desk. "Then we do this the right way, with evidence, witnesses, legal motions, not emotions." Clarence smiled. "That's the only way I know." Back in Georgia, Deputy Nash stepped outside the sheriff's station for a smoke. He leaned against the brick wall, eyes scanning the parked cruisers. "You think that old guy's gonna file a complaint?" he asked as Riggins joined him. Riggins chuckled. "Let him. Who's gonna care what some retired geezer has to say?" But Nash felt a flicker of unease. He'd seen men like Clarence before, not loud, not confrontational, just methodical. The kind who didn't strike out, they waited, studied you, then quietly took you apart, piece by piece, with witnesses watching. Still, they brushed it off. What were the odds? But the complaint was already written. The statements already signed. And within days, both deputies would receive envelopes they never expected. The heading read, United States District Court, Middle District of Georgia. Riggins stared at the paper like it was written in another language. He looked over at Nash, whose lips had gone dry as he scanned the pages. "You're kidding," Nash whispered. "Nope," Riggins muttered. "Clarence goddamn Dupree. That's the name on the complaint." "Wait, Dupree?" Nash blinked. "He's not just some old man, is he?" Riggins flipped to the second page, reading aloud more slowly now. Retired civil rights lawyer, former state prosecutor, licensed to practice in both Florida and Georgia, served on federal reform panels. Nash swallowed hard. "We're in trouble." 3 hours south, Clarence and Evelyn sat at the long oak dining table they'd turned into a makeshift legal strategy room, papers, case law, and printouts spread across every inch. "I filed under Section 1983, Clarence said. "Violation of our 4th and 14th Amendment rights. We'll pursue financial damages and ask for a federal injunction on the sheriff's search procedures." Evelyn studied the document with sharp focus. "You referenced Warren versus United States?" "Of course," he said, tapping the margin with his pen. "But we're not stopping there. Rosalind sent me 2 older complaints against these deputies, both thrown out without explanation. We'll show a consistent pattern." She raised her eyebrows. "You're moving like you never left the courtroom." Clarence gave a modest grin. "Truth is, I never did. I was just waiting for a reason." There was a knock at the door. Evelyn answered it. Standing there was Rosalind Thomas, jeans, blazer, and a thick folder in hand. "I brought the internal affairs records," she said, stepping inside. "They're redacted, but still damning." Clarence motioned to the table. "Let's get to work." For the next 2 hours, the trio built their case. Riggins had previously been suspended for excessive force during a traffic stop in Tifton. Nash had a formal warning for racist comments during a checkpoint back in 2020. Clear behavioral pattern, Rosalind said. Combined with your account, we've got solid footing. Evelyn added, we'll need the dashcam footage subpoenaed. They'll probably say it malfunctioned, but make them prove it. Clarence nodded. I already filed the request. Also flagged a nearby gas station security cam. It may not show the stop itself, but it timestamps our movement just before. That gives us context. Rosalind let out a low whistle. You're hitting them from every side. Clarence leaned back in his chair, face calm but worn. We're not just proving what they did to us. We're proving how often they've done this to others and gotten away with it. That night, Clarence and Evelyn sat quietly on their porch, coffee in hand, the night still around them. You think they'll take this seriously? She asked. They will, Clarence replied, once the courtroom fills with reporters. She took a long sip, then looked over at him. I'm not looking for revenge. Neither am I, he said. I want justice. That's it? Their eyes locked for a long moment. Back in Loudoun County, Sheriff Donald Creedy stared at the lawsuit, his jaw tight. He'd been in law enforcement for 26 years. He'd seen lawsuits come and go. Most fell apart quickly. But this one? This wasn't some angry teenager with a smartphone. This was Clarence Dupree, the man who once dismantled a voter suppression bill in a single televised hearing. He picked up his phone and called both deputies into his office. You two better hire yourselves a damn good attorney, he said, and keep your mouth shut around the press. Riggins scratched his neck. You really think this is going to blow up like that? Sheriff Creedy didn't blink. It already has. But by the time the trial began, it wasn't just about a traffic stop anymore. It had become about every stop like it that came before. On the morning of the hearing, a line curled around the courthouse. Some had come because they recognized the name Dupree. Others showed up after catching the news headline, retired civil rights lawyer challenges sheriff's office over traffic encounter. A few arrived simply out of curiosity to see if it was real. But inside the building, the atmosphere wasn't fiery, it was dense with anticipation. In the bathroom, Clarence adjusted his tie. He wore a charcoal gray suit, crisp white shirt, and a deep burgundy tie, the same outfit he wore for his final case years ago. He studied his reflection. His face had aged, yes, but his eyes still burned with that same resolve he had back in 1993, when he defended a labor organizer in Birmingham. They were focused, unshaken. Outside the courtroom, Evelyn waited by the door in a cream-colored blazer over a navy dress, holding her judge's briefcase, the same one she hadn't touched in nearly 10 years. As Clarence approached, she smiled gently. Ready? As I'll ever be, he said. They entered together, quiet, steady, deliberate. All eyes turned. Across the aisle, Riggins and Nash sat stiffly in mismatched dress shirts and crooked ties. No attorneys beside them yet, just a county rep flipping through a binder, clearly unprepared. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Court was now in session. The proceedings started with formalities like peeling back the surface of something rotting underneath. The county's attorney claimed it had been a routine stop, following standard operating procedure. Clarence stayed silent. For now. When it was finally his turn, he stood, calm, composed, confident. My wife and I were pulled over without just cause, subjected to an unwarranted search, and treated with disrespect, all without consequence. He began, voice steady. This isn't just about inconvenience. It's about a violation of dignity, the slow erosion that silences people over time. He moved thoughtfully before the bench. You might argue the officers didn't know who I was, and you'd be right. But they behaved as though it didn't matter, and that's the real issue. They believed we were insignificant, dismissible. Judge Marcia Delano, a woman in her mid-50s, listened without expression, her pen gently tapping her notepad. We bring evidence, Clarence continued. We bring prior complaints. We bring truth. Not to stir sympathy, but to deliver what this courtroom was built for, justice. He returned to his seat. Evelyn leaned in and whispered, That was the opener. Clarence nodded. Now the evidence speaks. 2 rows back, Rosalind jotted down every detail. She had secured verified footage from the gas station security cameras. It showed Clarence's Buick leaving the lot with both taillights functioning perfectly, time-stamped 6 minutes before the stop. It also caught the sheriff's cruiser trailing them shortly afterward. Then came the dispatch logs. Rosalind had Pulse call records. Riggins never reported probable cause. No mention of a suspicious car. No official entry of a traffic offense, not until 10 minutes after the stop had ended. Clarence filed it all as Exhibit B. By day 3, the courtroom was packed. More reporters arrived. 2 legal scholars from Georgia Southern took seats in the back. A local pastor brought half his congregation. The tone had shifted. This wasn't just Clarence and Evelyn's case anymore. This was for everyone watching. Riggins noticed it too, how the crowd leaned in when Clarence spoke. How his words, though measured, struck like verses of truth. Nash leaned over. "We should have let them drive off." Riggins didn't answer. He just stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. But Clarence wasn't finished. The room fell quiet as Deputy Carl Riggins was called to the stand. He walked slowly, visibly uncomfortable in a poorly fitted suit. He sat down, avoiding Clarence's eyes. Clarence rose, not with drama, but with intent. Calm, sharp, controlled. "Deputy Riggins," he began, "what prompted you to pull my vehicle over on June 4th? Riggins cleared his throat. "Broken taillight, sir." Clarence nodded. "Which one?" "The, left taillight." "You're sure?" "Yes, left." Clarence stepped to the evidence table and turned on a monitor. A still image appeared, his car leaving the Shell station, both taillights glowing bright red. This was recorded 6 minutes before the stop, Clarence said, by a traffic camera at Highway 84 and Barrett Road. "Can you point out which light appears defective?" Riggins stared. Silent. Clarence continued. "Is there any official repair order, violation notice, or mechanical record showing damage to that taillight in the file?" I don't know." Clarence turned to the judge. "Your Honor, Exhibit C contains assigned the inspection report from our longtime mechanic, dated the day after the incident, confirms that both taillights were functioning properly." Judge Delano arched an eyebrow but remained silent. Clarence turned his attention back to Riggins. "Did you notify dispatch of any suspicious activity before stopping our vehicle?" "No, sir." "So you only contacted dispatch after the stop?" "That's correct." Clarence slowly moved across the courtroom again. "Deputy Riggins, during the stop, did you refer to me as a smart-mouthed old man?" Riggins hesitated. "I don't recall saying that." Clarence opened his notebook. "I wrote it down at 3:37 p.m., just after I declined your request to search the vehicle. Would it surprise you to know I was documenting everything you said by hand as it occurred?" The deputy swallowed. "I guess not." "And when my wife asked why she was being told to exit the vehicle, did you say it was because she looked nervous?" "She seemed—" He paused. "Yes, I said that." Clarence faced the judge. "Your Honor, under department policy, is a person appearing nervous justification for a physical search?" Riggins didn't answer. From the gallery, Rosalind stood. "Objection, Your Honor," said the county's attorney, a tall man named Henson Lee. "He's leading the witness." Sustained, Judge Delano replied, then added under her breath, "But I still want to hear that answer, just not on the record." Riggins looked like he wanted to vanish. Then it was Officer Nash's turn on the stand. He fidgeted, eyes shifting, tapping his foot against the chair's leg. Clarence dove in. "Officer Nash, are you aware of a previous internal affairs complaint filed against you in March 2020? "Yeah," Nash muttered. "Can you share the details of that complaint?" "Some woman said I made a comment at a DUI checkpoint." "What was the comment?" "I don't remember." Clarence raised an eyebrow. "I do. According to the complaint, you said, 'People like you always look guilty.'" "Objection, irrelevant," Henson interjected. "Sustained, unless this is tied to a recurring pattern," Judge Delano warned. Clarence held up a folder. "Your Honor, I intend to establish a repeated pattern of behavior by both officers through prior civilian complaints and departmental responses from the past 3 years. The judge leaned in. Proceed. What followed was a half hour of methodical, unrelenting questioning. Clarence aligned complaint reports with incident logs, exposing inconsistencies one after another. By the time he finished, Nash was slumped in his seat, tugging at his collar. In the gallery, Evelyn whispered to Rosalind, "Now he knows who he stopped." Rosalind smirked. "Too late?" Clarence returned to his seat beside Evelyn. Judge Delano glanced at the time, then at the docket. "We'll reconvene tomorrow for final arguments." But the damage had already been done. And the next day, the trial wouldn't just be about 2 officers. It would be about a broken system that made them feel above accountability. When court resumed the following morning, it was standing room only. Word had spread faster than anyone anticipated. Black elders from local churches, law students from Macon, even a few off-duty officers, all gathered in quiet anticipation. The atmosphere wasn't just tense. It was electric. Clarence didn't pace or speak with volume. He stood firm and began softly. "When I was 9, my father was stopped walking home from work. They said he fit the description. They made him lie face down on the pavement, took his tools, and left his clothes torn. He came home shaken." Clarence paused. I asked him why he didn't shout, why he didn't resist. He said, "Because if I did, you might never see me again." Silence. Years later, I was in law school reading Terry versus Ohio, hoping that maybe, just maybe, there were laws to protect us from that kind of abuse. But time after time, I saw those laws ignored, twisted, used to justify mistreatment. And last week, it happened again. He turned to face the judge, voice clear and firm. "This case is not about wounded pride. It's about abuse of power. About 2 officers who thought they could decide on a rural Georgia road who deserved respect and who didn't." He stepped back. No dramatics, just truth. The county's lawyer stood up, clearly trying to recover. "Your Honor, my clients acted within departmental policy. If they made poor choices, they did so under the pressure of the field. There was no intent to cause harm." Clarence didn't move. But from the gallery, Evelyn leaned toward Rosalind. "That's their defense. Intent? Like disrespect doesn't matter if it wasn't on purpose?" Rosalind whispered back, classic. After brief closing arguments from both sides, the judge called for a recess. When she returned an hour later, every person in the room leaned forward. Judge Delano didn't hesitate. "Based on the testimony, the evidence submitted, and the established misconduct, this court finds in favor of the plaintiffs, Clarence and Evelyn Dupree." Gasps rippled through the gallery. The officers' actions violated the 4th and 14th Amendments. Deputy Riggins and Officer Nash are hereby suspended without pay, pending a full review by Internal Affairs. The Lawrence County Sheriff's Department is ordered to issue a public apology and pay compensatory damages. "In the amount of $125,000. She paused. "Let this judgment be a message. Wearing a badge doesn't mean you're above consequences." With one strike of her gavel, the judge ended it. Case closed. Riggins stayed frozen in his seat. Nash leaned forward, face buried in his hands. Sheriff Creedy, who had been sitting quietly in the second row all week trying to blend in, slipped out before anyone could ask questions. Clarence turned toward Evelyn, reached over, and gave her hand a quiet, reassuring squeeze. She didn't smile exactly, but her chin lifted slightly as she rose. Reporters swarmed toward them, pushing microphones close. Clarence raised a hand. "We're not giving statements," he said, "but I'll say this. We didn't show up to make noise. We came to make a point. It's not about who you are. It's about what's right." That evening, back on the porch of their home in Tallahassee, Clarence sat quietly with the verdict letter in hand. Evelyn joined him, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "You think they'll change?" she asked. "No," Clarence replied. "But someone who saw this might." She nodded. "Then it was worth it." Clarence folded the letter, slid it into his notebook, and closed it. But for him and Evelyn, this wasn't closure. It was a beginning, something they hadn't planned for, but couldn't ignore anymore. 2 weeks after the ruling, Clarence DeVapre stood before a classroom at Florida A&M's College of Law. He wasn't behind a podium, just standing at the whiteboard, sleeves rolled up, notebook in hand. 20 law students watched him closely. Some scribbled notes. Others just listened. All eyes locked on the man who turned a courtroom into a masterclass. The law doesn't always equal justice, Clarence said as he paced, but it gives you tools. The system isn't broken, it was designed this way. Your job isn't just to argue it, it's to learn where the cracks are and use them. A tall student in a navy sweatshirt raised his hand. Mr. Dupree, how'd you stay calm during that stop? I mean, knowing what they were doing, didn't it make you furious? Clarence nodded. Of course it did. But anger doesn't win in court. Clarity does. Paperwork does. Knowing how they'll twist your words, that's how you win. Another student, a soft-spoken woman with neatly braided hair, asked, And your wife? She didn't look afraid. Clarence smiled faintly. Deborah's never been afraid of men like that. She's dealt with worse in her courtroom than those deputies could ever manage. He paused, then added something he hadn't intended to share. The truth? That wasn't the first time something like this happened. Just the first time we said enough. After class, several students hung back to talk more. Clarence answered every one of their questions. He even handed out copies of the case file, not as inspiration, but as a lesson. Meanwhile, Deborah, who never cared for the spotlight, was quietly drafting the charter for a new nonprofit, the Gideon South Legal Aid Initiative, named after the Supreme Court case that guaranteed public defense. It would provide free legal services to rural communities targeted by abusive policing. We're not trying to fix the whole system, she told Rosalind one afternoon. Just give the folks at the bottom a fighting chance. Rosalind leaned back in her chair. You sure you want to run it? You were retired, remember? Deborah laughed. Retirement was peaceful, but this is necessary. News of the Dupree case verdict spread across regional law enforcement circles. Internal reviews were launched, quietly. Sheriff Creedy was seen less and less in public. Riggins and Nash had each hired attorneys, no longer cocky, just quiet. A local podcast released an episode titled, When the Wrong People Get Pulled Over. It shot up the charts, not for its polish, but for its honesty. No dramatic editing. Just a conversation about power and what happens when it's used carelessly. Back home, Clarence and Deborah lived the same way they always had. Early mornings, strong coffee, long porch conversations. One Saturday, Clarence was sorting mail when he stopped. A handwritten envelope. No return address. He opened it. Inside was a single sentence. I watched what you did. I'm applying to law school. Clarence read it twice, then again. He slid it into the same notebook that held the court ruling and the photograph from the gas station. Then he stepped outside and handed it to Deborah. She read it and looked at him. Told you it mattered. He sat beside her. They both looked out toward the horizon. People say justice is blind, Clarence said after a moment. But maybe it's not. Maybe it just looks away until someone forces it to look harder. She didn't say a word. Just reached for his hand. They sat there, two legal minds, shaped by decades of courtroom battles. And now, building a legacy. Because that stop on a rural Georgia road had never been about a taillight. It was about a broken system. And that system just got a reminder. Not through rage, not through revenge, but through the law. If this story meant something to you, pass it on. Talk about it. Use it, because silence never changed anything. But stories like this, they just might.